Hi YouTube, and welcome back to our channel. Now today's video is actually a very famous Canadian case, and this happened over 10 years ago, but I still find people talking about it to this day because of how unbelievable this story was. It was just so unfathomable to so many people that something like this could happen, especially in a country like Canada. And I remember the first time we heard about this happening, I was 17 or 18, and I was at a friend's house and we were all just hanging out. And then her mom walks into the kitchen, and they had a small TV in the kitchen, and she tells us to quiet down because she's turning on the news, something was happening. And we all just had our eyes glued to the TV for like 15-20 minutes just watching what was happening. Now, before we get into today's case, I just want to send a quick reminder to please consider subscribing if you guys are into this sort of content. I'm sure by now you guys know we like talking about true crime, paranormal stuff, unsolved mysteries. So if that is the sort of stuff that you're into, please consider subscribing and hit the like button. It really does help us grow here on YouTube. Now, if you haven't guessed, today's story is actually about Tim McClean and the Greyhound bus murder situation, the horrific story that really just captured headlines across Canada, across the US. I'm pretty sure most of the world has heard about this story. So of course, to understand why this happened and to get a better understanding of the people involved in this story, we have to go back to the beginning. Now, I just want to insert a little bit of a disclaimer that I mean no disrespect to the families involved in this story. We are just telling this story based on the facts that we've been able to find online. So just a little bit of a disclaimer there. This is all information that has been made public, and we're compiling it into one video. So Tim McClean was born in October of 1985. He was actually born in Victoria, British Columbia, which is on the west coast of Canada. Now, he spent most of his time growing up in a city called Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is actually more in the center of Canada. And this is where the story actually takes place. So he was only 22 when this whole situation took place, and unfortunately his life was cut really short. His family described him as being a super fun-loving person, full of energy, full of life. He was the person that would talk to anyone and would make friends with just about anyone as well, which I guess translated into what he was doing as a career at the time. He was actually working as a carny and traveling from location to location, working with a carnival. And on this day, he was actually coming back home to Winnipeg on the Greyhound bus when chaos broke out on this bus. Now, I'm sure as you've guessed, Tim was the victim in this story. Now we're gonna jump to the actual assailant in this story, and his name is Vince Li. He was actually born in 1968 in Dandong, China, and he was described as being a fairly intelligent individual. He actually graduated with a computer science degree and was working as a computer software engineer. Eventually, he wanted to move out of the country. He didn't want to be in China anymore, and he was tired of being a computer engineer in Beijing. So on June 11th, 2001, he actually emigrated from Beijing to Canada and eventually became a citizen in 2006. Now, at the time when he moved to Canada, he was married, and his wife's name was Anna. And it's reported, unfortunately, that Vince was struggling adapting to life in a new country, to life in Canada. Now, it's reported that he didn't quite understand English very well. He had a hard time speaking it. He was having a hard time adjusting to the culture. He couldn't really find a job comparable to the one that he had in China. So it was fairly difficult for him. And on the day that this entire situation happened, it's actually believed that Vince was heading to Winnipeg to go to a job interview. Now, in 2004, this is now 4 years before the incident happened, Vince's wife was noticing him acting very strange. He wasn't eating anymore. He wasn't he wasn't his usual self. He wasn't sleeping. He was just exhibiting very strange behavior, which she noticed, and she thought it was a little bit alarming. Eventually, he ended up telling her that he was seeing things, that he had apparently seen God. So she didn't really know what to do with this information. She thought that maybe he was just seeing things or imagining things because he wasn't sleeping. So her solution to this was to go to the local drugstore and get him some sleeping pills in hopes that it would help his insomnia and kind of help him get back to normal a little bit. Unfortunately, this didn't really work out, and Anna found herself having to take care of her husband quite a bit, and this resulted in her having to take time off of work. And her friends noticed this actually, and they all really pleaded with her to take him to a doctor to get him checked out. And unfortunately, Anna just didn't want to do that because she was afraid that her husband would be diagnosed with some sort of mental illness, which would then translate into several other, obstacles that they would need to overcome. So she ignored their advice and decided that she would do her best to take care of him at home. Now, in 2005, Vince decided he was going to go back to China to see his family. Now, at this time, Anna took the opportunity to call up his family and plead with his parents that they really need to take him to a doctor. And unfortunately, it's not really known as to whether or not he was taken to a doctor that year. And then later that year, when he came back to Canada, him and Anna actually ended up getting divorced. But being the loving wife, she really did care for him throughout their separation and their divorce. Anna allowed Vince to stay with her in their same home until he was able to either get better or to, kind of get himself back on his feet. Now, this is where things started to get really, really strange. So later in the same year, we're still in 2004 here, Vince started telling Anna that he was hearing a lot of voices and that he was hearing God's voice specifically. And he was telling him a whole bunch of crazy stuff. He apparently told him that God was telling him to write down his journey because apparently he was the next story of the Bible and that he was apparently the second coming of Jesus. So you can see here there are definitely signs of something deeper going on at this point. Then he said something really, really wild, definitely something that would raise a lot of alarms. A lot of people would definitely think there was something definitely medically wrong with this person. He said that God was telling him that there was going to be a space alien attack and that it was his job to save the world. And this was the reason why he would end up moving from city to city later on in the story. Now, in March 2005, Vince said a voice told him that he needed to leave Winnipeg and actually go to Thompson, Manitoba. Now, at this point, he didn't have any money, but the voice was telling him that he absolutely needed to go and that he needed to buy land in this area. 6 months later, the same voice told him that this time he needed to go to Toronto. Now, somehow he found the money, bought himself a plane ticket, and flew to Toronto, only for the voice to literally tell him as he landed in Toronto that he needed to go back to Winnipeg. So he's listening to this voice and he's in Toronto and having no money. He can't really buy himself a plane ticket to go back. So he ends up walking, or at least trying to walk back to Winnipeg. And the voice actually told him to ditch his luggage. So he ends up getting rid of his luggage and literally starts walking on the highway back to Winnipeg. It was here that he was actually picked up by police. It was a strange thing to see a man walking on the highway. You don't really see that every day. So the police stopped him and they assessed him and they actually took him to a mental hospital in Etobicoke where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now, the doctors that were examining him here said that he was hallucinating and he wasn't acting like he was all there. He would just blankly stare into a random direction and he would say that he was seeing things that weren't there. Now, during this exam, the doctors actually thought that Vince was a danger not only to himself but to the public. So this resulted in the doctors giving him a prescribed medication, which Vince refused to take apparently. And they also actually detained him in the hospital for 14 days. But unfortunately, he actually didn't end up serving the 14 days. He actually left after 10 days. Now, Vince apparently, in interviews he gave after this entire ordeal, he said that he actually escaped from the hospital after 10 days, whereas the hospital kind of refused to give any sort of admission or admit that they had actually let him go or whether he escaped. There was a lot of conflict around this because usually if a patient leaves under involuntary admission, the hospital is actually supposed to alert the police, which they did not do. From here, he was actually able to make his way back to Winnipeg. Now, unfortunately, the way the system works is that the provinces don't speak to each other when it comes to medical cases. So because he was detained in Ontario, Manitoba would have had no way of knowing that he was actually ill and that he needed to be kind of detained at this point. So in 2007, he actually went back to China to see his family, and here he was apparently given a clean bill of health when he went to go see a doctor. Then in 2008, him and Anna actually decided to get back together. They decided to move in back together and give their relationship another try. Then in July of 2008, he actually left a note for Anna one day, and it said, "Don't look for me, I wish you were happy." Now, Anna thought this was a little bit weird, but it wasn't completely out of character for him considering how strange his behavior would be from time to time. And that would be the last time she would hear of her husband until she received a phone call from the police later on that month. Now, on July 28th, 2008, at approximately noon, Vince was seen by several people boarding a bus in Edmonton heading for Winnipeg. I also want to mention, I forgot to mention that when him and Anna got back together in 2008, they had actually relocated to Toronto at this point. On July 29th at 6 p.m., Vince was seen getting off a bus in Erickson, Manitoba. He had his luggage with him, and he was seen by several people sitting on a bench just outside a grocery store, and he was kind of just sitting there, not really doing anything, just minding his own business. But it was very odd behavior because he just sat there and just stared directly for what seemed like hours and hours. And according to one witness, he actually saw Vince still sitting there on the same bench at approximately 3 a.m. later that night, just staring out into the darkness. Now, on July 30th, he was actually still seen sitting on this bench. And this time, it was actually reported that he sold his brand new laptop to a 15-year-old boy for $60. Now, this is where the incident that took over Global Head News takes place. Later that day, Tim McClean was seen boarding the bus from Edmonton to Winnipeg, and he actually was seen by several people getting onto the bus, and he actually sat at the very back of the bus, just one row ahead of the bathroom. At 6:55 p.m., the bus stops in Erickson, Manitoba, where it actually picks up Vince. Now, he originally had sat at the front of the bus, but later on in the trip, he actually moved to the back and ended up sitting right next to Tim. Witnesses said that Tim didn't really seem to care that Vince was sitting next to him. It seemed like Tim was really just preoccupied on getting some sleep. He was seen with his head leaning against the window and his headphones in. Now, shortly before 8:30 p.m. is when absolutely all hell broke loose on the bus. Tim was sleeping, he was fast asleep, and this is when Vince actually pulls out a gigantic knife from his backpack and literally just starts stabbing Tim in the neck and in the chest area. So immediately, people start screaming, chaos breaks out on this bus, and everyone is just completely in shock at what is happening. So right away, the driver actually stops the bus on the side of the road, opens the door, and everyone runs out of the bus, obviously completely in panic. And one of the smart things the bus driver did was he actually initiated an emergency brake, which would prevent the bus from going anywhere. Now, while everyone was outside, the driver and two other men actually tried to go back inside to see if they can help Tim out, but Vince apparently chased them off the bus, kind of like waving the knife around, trying to scare them off. So basically, they were forced off the bus. Tim was trapped on here, and Vince just kept going at it, just kept assaulting him. Now, fair warning, a little bit of disclaimer, this is a little bit gory. So from the outside, everyone is just staring into this Greyhound bus, and because no one can really get in, all they can do is watch in horror as Vince goes back to where Tim is sitting and starts literally decapitating him with his ginormous knife. Then, after he does this, he basically starts dismembering him piece by piece, and there were plenty of witnesses that saw this happening, and they also said that as he was dismembering him, he would actually throw different pieces of Tim's body across the bus. And then at one point, Vince actually did try to drive off with the bus, but because the driver had initiated that emergency brake, he couldn't do this. By 9 p.m., obviously the police were called, and they were in a complete standoff with Vince, which lasted approximately 2 hours. And when the police gave their reports, they actually said that they saw Vince carrying around Tim's head, waving it around the bus almost like a trophy, and he would it seemed like he was trying to eat pieces of his head. It was just very, very gruesome and disgusting to see, and this is what truly shocked everyone. No one could believe that something this insane would happen. Eventually, Vince tried to break out of the bus by breaking a window, and that didn't work out for him. Police were actually able to tase him and capture him. Now, when police were doing a quick pat down on him, they actually found Tim's ears and tongue inside of Vince's pockets, and sadly, they actually never found Tim's eyes or his heart, and it's suspected that Vince actually ate these. So a year goes by and the trial comes around, and Vince pleads not guilty due to insanity, that he was not criminally responsible for this because he had basically gone insane during this event. His defense team argued that he had been hearing voices, that he was hallucinating, and that he was suffering from a legitimate mental illness. So the judge obviously agrees in this case and assigned him to a mental institution. And it took many, many years. In Canada, if you're found to be actually mentally ill and you commit a crime like this, you don't actually go to jail. You go to a mental hospital so they can rehabilitate you, give you the medication that you need in hopes of integrating you back into society. And this is what happened. It took many, many years of Vince for him to actually be set free. He had to go through many, many tests, had to take his medication. I believe he still takes medication. He had to adjust his living situations from being in the hospital to slowly being reintegrated back into society. It wasn't just like, okay, you're in the hospital and then they're going to put him back outside without any supervision. He had to go through many, many years of rehabilitation. It wasn't until 2016, so 8 years later, that Vince was released back into society and all charges were completely dismissed. So he is living back in Canada. I believe he actually did change his name. Now, I know there's probably a lot of questions that many of you have about this, and surprisingly, Vince actually gave an interview in 2012 where he answered a lot of the questions that we all have. Now, it's important to note and to acknowledge that Vince actually is quite remorseful of what happened. He continuously asks for forgiveness of Tim's family. He's embarrassed about what happened. He feels extremely guilty about this. Now, he was asked whether or not he remembered the entire situation, and he said he did. He did remember what happened, and that he was completely embarrassed what was happening, and that at the time he didn't know that it was wrong, but after going through extensive therapy and taking his medication, he was able to understand and acknowledge what happened was wrong. Now, of course, the reporters in this interview asked him why he did what he did, and Vince explained that he had actually heard the voice of God telling him that this was the space alien attack beginning and that Tim was actually an evil alien. From here, the voice actually ended up telling him that if he did not kill Tim, then Tim would go on to kill on many, many other people. So at the time, he truly believed that there was some sort of space alien attack and that he was truly afraid of Tim, and that's basically why he did what he did. Later on in the interview, he goes on to say that he's still taking his medication and that fortunately he no longer hears these voices in his head. So that does it for today's story. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I know this was a very intense story. It was a very shocking one when I first heard about it, for sure. It's just sad that the entire medical system, health system let Vince down. If he would have been treated earlier, all of this could have been prevented, but unfortunately that's just the way things happened. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below of this story. All right, so thank you guys for joining me, and I will see you guys in the next video.